And now for a look at the Sarah Palin we never knew. Not the Sarah Palin who ran a simple-minded losing campaign for vice president and quit her job as governor, whereupon she obviously gave up any hope of running for elective office again, but continued to fool most pundits and fuel book sales and lecture fees and the ratings of her TV show by pretending to flirt with the notion of running for president. No, this is a look at the Sarah Palin who ran a clever insurgents campaign for governor and then became the governor who stood before the Republican National Convention in 2008 and legitimately made this claim.
This was the spirit that brought me to the governor's office when I took on the old politics as usual in Juneau, when I stood up to the special interests and the lobbyists and the big oil companies and the good old boys.
What her Republican handlers did not allow her to say in that speech is that the way she stood up to the big oil companies in Alaska was that she raised taxes on the big oil companies in Alaska. In that same speech, Palin's new writers filled her with right-wing resentments.
I guess a small-town mayor is sort of like a community organizer, except that you have actual responsibilities. I might add that in small towns, we don't quite know what to make of a candidate who lavishes praise on working people when they're listening and then talks about how bitterly they cling to their religion and guns when those people aren't listening.
Joining me now is Joshua Green, a senior editor of The Atlantic, whose latest article, The Tragedy of Sarah Palin, is in the magazine this month. Thanks for joining us tonight, Joshua.
Good to be here.
Just when I thought I knew everything about Sarah Palin, you have to come along with this article that teaches me how much I don't know. What is the tragedy of Sarah Palin?
Well, the tragedy of Sarah Palin that I write about in the piece was that the Palin who governed Alaska was really nothing like the Sarah Palin who became a national political figure. Palin in Alaska took on the Republican Party. She took on the oil companies that had dominated and over a quarter of a century corrupted the state of Alaska to the point that the FBI came in and made arrests and hauled off state legislators. She came in as a sort of reformist third-way politician and really cleaned up the state. Alaska today has a $12 billion budget surplus as a result of a law she passed. Alaskans don't seem to like her very much anymore, but she really left the state in pretty decent shape. And the tragedy is that she didn't run on the national stage as what she really had been in Alaska.
And when she did this move against the oil companies, she had to reach across the aisle to Democrats in the legislature for that, didn't she?
Well, she really did. I mean, the oil companies essentially took over the Republican Party in Alaska in the early 1980s and controlled it. And the only mechanism for breaking that oil company lock was to get a few reformist Republicans like Palin and essentially independents in the Democratic Party and break that lock. And that's exactly what Palin did. And it was a really significant accomplishment if you understand the history of Alaska politics in the forces that were gripping that state before she became governor.
In your article, you quote Hollis French, a Democratic state senator, and he said, "She had the appearance of someone who was willing to go in a different direction. We subsequently learned that she'll throw anyone under a bus, but that wasn't apparent at the time. It looked like real moral courage."
Well, and I think in fairness, it was real moral courage. I mean, Palin was an up-and-coming Republican legislator who took on the entrenched Republican governor of her own party. She took off after the state Republican Party chairman and basically did something that most people would consider suicidal for her political career. But what she got out of that was she cleaned up the state. She emerged as a reformer. And at the time John McCain chose her to be his vice president, she really was a sort of maverick type of figure, like we used to associate John McCain with being back in the sort of 2000 era John McCain.
Now, when the Republicans, McCain and Bill Kristol and these Republicans who got excited about her, looked at her before she was chosen for vice president, didn't they see things that they didn't like, these raising taxes on oil companies and things like that?
Well, I'm not sure it's that clear-cut. The state of Alaska owns most of the oil in Alaska, so raising taxes on oil companies is really just getting more of Alaskans getting their fair share of revenue. It's not quite the same thing as taxing private enterprise. But what Palin had done is it was to come in and really kind of wow the state with her obvious, natural, innate political skills and win over not just Republicans, ordinary Republicans in the state who were disgusted by the corruption, but also Democrats, independents, and even liberals. I mean, so she seemed to be, a very powerful, very compelling, very charismatic person. She was the most popular governor in the country in 2007. So she really seemed to have a political future that I think would have appealed to folks like Crystal.
Joshua Green of The Atlantic, thanks very much for your time tonight, Joshua.
Great being with you, Lawrence.